Hi everyone, this will be the European Union, a very short introduction. Chapter 1, What is the EU for? The European Union of today is a result of a process that began over half a century ago with the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community. Those two industries then still provided the industrial muscle for military power, and Robert Schuman and the French Foreign Minister affirmed on May 9th, 1950, in his declaration, which launched the project, that any war between France and Germany would become not merely unthinkable, but militarily impossible. It may not be easy, at today's distance, to appreciate how much this meant only 5 years after the war of 1939 to 1945 that had brought so much terrible suffering to almost all European countries. For France and Germany, which had been at war with each other over 3 years in the preceding 8 decades, finding a way to live together in a durable peace was fundamental political priority that the new community was designed to serve. For France, the prospect of completely independent Germany with its formidable industrial potential was alarming. The attempt to keep Germany down, as the French had tried to do after the 1914-1918 war, had failed disastrously. The idea of binding Germany, with strong institutions, would equally bind France and other European countries and thus be acceptable to Germans over the long term seemed more promising. That promise has been amply fulfilled. The French could regard the European Community, and now the EU, the European Union, as the outcome of their original initiative, and they sought with considerable success to play the part of leader among the European nations, though since the accession of 12 new member states in 2005 and 2007 have become less confident of their leadership role. But participation in these European institutions on an equal basis has also given Germany a framework within which to develop peaceful and constructive relations with a growing number of other member states, as well as to complete their unification smoothly in 1990. Following the 12 years of Nazi rule that ended with devastation in 1945, the community offered Germans a way to become a respected people again. The idea of a community of equals with strong institutions was attractive. Schuman had also declared a new community would be the first concrete foundation of a European federation, which is indispensable to the preservation of peace. But whereas the French commitment to developing a community in a federal direction has been the variable, the German political class, having thoroughly absorbed the concept of federal democracy, has quite consistently supported such development. In 1992, indeed, an amendment to the Basic Law of Reunified Germany provided for its participation in the European Union, committed to federal principles. The other founder states, Belgium, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, also saw the new community as a means to ensure peace by binding Germany with strong European institutions. For the most part, too, like the Germans, saw the community as a stage in development of a federal polity, and having largely continued to do so. Although World War II is receding into a more distant past, the motive of peace and security with a democratic polity was fundamental to the foundation of the community, remains a powerful influence on governments and politicians in many of the member states. The system has provided a framework for over half a century of peace, is regarded as a guarantee of future stability. A recent example was the decision to consolidate it by introducing the single currency, seen as a way to reinforce the safe anchorage of the potentially more powerful Germany after the unification. The accession of 10 Central and Eastern European states seeking a safe haven after the Second World War, followed by half a century of Soviet domination, was another. And there has been continuing pressure to strengthen the Union's institutions in order to maintain stability as Eastern enlargement increases the number of member states toward 30 or more, including several new democracies. The British, have avoiding the experience of defeat and occupation, did not share the fundamental motive for the sharing of sovereignty with other European peoples and felt reliance on the US and NATO to be sufficient. Hence the focus on the economic aspects of integration that has been common among British politicians has restricted their ability to play an influential, constructive part in some of the most significant developments. The EU's potential contribution to making the world a safer place in fields such as climate change and peacekeeping, as well as its external economic and aid policies more generally could, however, as suggested later in this book, provide grounds for a change in this fundamental British attitude. While durable peace was a profound political move for establishing the new community, it would not have succeeded without adequate performance in the economic field in which it was given its powers, and the community did not, in fact, serve economic as well as political logic. The frontiers between France, Germany, Belgium, and Luxembourg, standing between steel plants and the mines, whose coals required imperative rational production, and the removal of those barriers accompanied by the common governance of the resulting common market was successful in economic terms. This, together with the evidence that peaceful reconciliation among member states was being achieved, encouraged them to see the European coal and steel community as a first step, as Schuman had indicated, in a process of political as well as economic unification. After an unsuccessful step at a second step with the French National Assembly failed to ratify a treaty for the European Defence Committee in 1954, the 6 founder states proceeded again on the path of economic integration. The concept of the common market was extended to the whole of their mutual trade in goods, with the European Economic Community, or EEC, was founded in 1958, opening up a way to the integrated economy that responded to the logic of economic interdependence among the member states. EEC was also, thanks to French insistence on the surrounding the common market with the common external tariff, able to enter trade negotiations on level terms with the United States. And this demonstrated the potential of the community to become a major actor in the international system when it becomes an instrument in which to conduct an external policy. It was a first step towards satisfying another motive for creating the community, to restore European influence in the wider world, which had been dissipated by the 2 fractionalized wars, and which could now be reinforced by the Union's potential for contributing to the much-needed global safety and prosperity. One exception to the British failure to understand the strength of the case for such radical reforms was Winston Churchill, who less than a year and a half later after the war said in a speech in Zurich, "We must now build a kind of United States of Europe. The first must be a partnership between France and Germany. France and Germany must take the lead together." But few amongst the British understood so well the case for a new community, and Churchill himself did not feel that Britain, then at the head of its empire, with a recently forged special relationship with the United States, should be a member. Many were, however, reluctant to be disadvantaged in continental markets and excluded from taking of important policy decisions. So after failing to secure a free trade area that would incorporate the EEC as well as other Western European countries, successive British governments sought entry into the community and finally succeeding in 1973. But while the British played a leading part in developing a common market into a more complete single market, they lacked the complete political moves that had driven the founder states, as well as some of the others, to press forward into forms of deeper integration. It is important to understand the motives of the founders and of the British, which they continue to evolve, still influence attitudes towards the European Union. Such motives are shared in various proportions by other states which have exceeded over the years. They underlie much of the drama that has unfolded since 1950, to produce a union which is the subject of this book. There are 2 main ways of explaining the phenomenon of the community of the Union. Adherents to one emphasize the role of member states in their intergovernmental dealings. Adherents to the other to give the greater weight to the European institutions. Most of the former, belonging to the realist or neo-realist schools of thought that hold the community of the Union, have not wrought any fundamental change in relationships among member states, whose governments continue to pursue their national interests and seek to maximize their power within the EU as elsewhere. A more recent, called liberal intergovernmentalism, looks to play forces in their domestic politics to explain government's behavior in the Union. For a want of a better word, intergovernmentalist is used below for this family of explanations as comes to the community and how the Union work. One should not underestimate the role of governments retain in the Union's affairs, with their power decision in the Council that represents member states and their monopoly of the ultima ratio of the armed force, but another approaches, including those known as neo-functional and federalism, giving more weight to the intergovernmentalists to the European institutions. Neo-functionalists saw the community developing by a process of a spillover from the original ECSC, with its scope confined only to two industrial sectors. Interest groups and political parties, attracted by the success of the community in dealing with the problems of these two sectors, became frustrated by the inability to deal with related problems in other fields and the world. With leadership from the European Commission, pressed successfully for the community's competence to be extended until it would eventually prove a form of European governance for a wide range of affairs to the member states. This offers at least partial explanation of some of the steps in the community's development, including the move from a single market to the single currency. A federalist perspective, while also stressing the importance of common institution, goes beyond neo-functionalism in two ways. First, it relates the transfer of powers to the Union less to a spillover from existing powers to new ones than the growing ability of governments to deal effectively with problems that have become transnational and so escape the reach of existing states. Most of these problems concern the economy, the environment, and security. The states should retain control over matters in which they can still cope adequately. Second, whereas neo-functionalists have not been clear about the principles that would shape the European institutions, a federalist perspective is based on the principles of liberal democracy. In particular, the rule of base law on fundamental rights, representative government with laws enacted, and the exclusive control by elected representatives of the citizens. In this view, the powers exercised jointly needed to deal by institutions of government, because the intergovernmental method is neither effective nor democratic enough to satisfy the needs of citizens of democratic states. So either the federal elements in the institutions will be strengthened until the Union becomes an effective democratic polity based on the principles of rule of law and representative government, or will fail to attract enough support from the citizens to enable it to flourish and perhaps even to survive. Subsequent chapters will try to show how far the development of the community and the Union has reflected these different views. Meanwhile, the reader should be warned, the authors considered that the need for effective and democratic government has moved the EC and the EU by steps and stages quite far in a federal direction, and should, by no means, certainly will continue to do so.